Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the PrepWell podcast. Today, I want to address the role that sports play in the lives of our children and what effect sports may have in the college admissions process. Because sports have become such a big industry and so ubiquitous that it's rare that we ever slow down enough to step back to evaluate why exactly our children are even playing sports to begin with, and where we think sports may take them. And as most of you know, left unchecked, sports can completely take over the lives of student athletes and our families, and dictate nearly every part of our lives, including spending and travel and scheduling and family dynamics, and sometimes college choices. So today, I want to break down the student athlete into 3 categories. Category number 1, the Division I athlete. Category number 2, the Division III athlete. And category number 3, the recreational athlete. I then want to review the most common motivations and oftentimes myths behind youth sports, and finally, give you an idea of when you should decide which of these categories your child fits into before it's too late. So let's start out with these 3 categories of student athletes. Number 1, the Division I athlete. This is the athlete that many parents dream about. The athlete who is an order of magnitude better than any of their peers in their particular sport, and they're destined to play Division I sports in college. And this separation from their peer group becomes apparent pretty early in their career. And we'll talk about how early that might happen in a few minutes. They're consistently playing above their age group and excelling. They make every all-star team. They make the fancy travel teams. They're invited to elite camps and tournaments. They're the MVP of their team. The feedback from coaches is clear that this is a special player with Division I potential. Now, after that description, are you thinking to yourself, yes, that's my child. You are describing my child to a T. He's made all-stars in baseball every year. She's been invited to play travel soccer. Or the club coaches tell me that she's so great. I know this is a likely refrain from many parents out there, especially from parents of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I had many of those same thoughts 4 or 5 years ago when my sons were moving up the ranks. But the truth is, for every 100 of us who believe that our child fits into this category of elite athlete, 98 of us are probably wrong. I don't think we're delusional necessarily to think that our child has what it takes to become an elite Division I athlete. I just think that in the moment, without a lot of perspective or context, many of us simply fall victim to the hype. I think many of us mistake an above-average athlete who's gotten high praise since a very young age for an elite Division I athletic prospect. And statistically, the math just doesn't add up. When I scan the crowds at sporting events and look at all the eager faces of the parents who are hanging on every pitch, every kick, every flip turn, every strikeout, it seems that most of them believe that their child is one of the chosen few. But the truth is, by the time our children get to high school and bodies start to change and competition heats up and some kids grow and others don't, and some kids work out a lot and others don't, some kids eat well and others don't, and some kids simply have talent that continues to grow and evolve and develop while others stagnate. This is where many of the dreams of Division I sports start to falter. And so it's important to look for the signs early on so that you can help them make the right decision. Do they double down on sports because they're a 2%er? Or has their athletic career run its course and they should start diversifying? And I realize that as a parent, this is difficult to do. It's difficult to be objective, especially after investing so many years and weekends and money feeding this beast. But at some point, in order to manage the expectations of your child and their high school career, both inside and outside of sports, it's important to periodically recalibrate where your child is on the spectrum and reassess their path before it's too late. Let's move on to category number 2, the Division III athlete. The Division III athlete is an athlete who was once an aspiring Division I athlete, but never quite made it over the hump. This probably represents 70 or 80% of the students who thought they were on track to be Division I athletes early on, and they never made it because their work ethic wasn't quite there, or they peaked too early, or their body type wasn't aligned with the needs of the sport at the highest level, or they burned out, or they were just never good enough to begin with. They still love the sport. They've committed 8 to 10 years in the sport, so they have a lot of sunk costs to consider. Their identity is wrapped up in the sport. They don't have much else going on in their lives outside of the sports. And many student athletes and parents, they want to save face. They don't want to admit to themselves, or anyone else for that matter, that the last 7 or 8 years were for naught. They don't want to quit the sport just because they're not Division I material, so they hold on. And yes, just because a child doesn't turn out to be a Division I athlete doesn't mean that all of that time was wasted by any means. Many of these athletes love the sport. They love the team and the camaraderie and the fun. And for many of them, their involvement in the sport has crowded out so many other things in their lives that they feel like they have to cling to the sport and try to use their skills to help them get into college. Otherwise, what was the point? This is not a bad strategy. Many student athletes who come to this conclusion end up with great outcomes. Obviously, the notion that they're going to get any kind of athletic scholarship money is off the table, since Division III schools don't give athletic scholarships. But at this point, they're so desperate to find a path forward in college, and sports is as good a jumping off point as anything else. And so they do their best to get recruited by Division III programs. And mind you, the time and the effort to get the attention of a Division III coach is not unlike what Division I athletes need to get recruited. It may even be harder in some cases. Division III prospects need to wage an all-out marketing campaign to coaches and hope that they get a bite. This is not easy. These days, getting recruited and supported, quote unquote, as an athlete at a division school is no small task. It takes work and emails and highlight reels and follow-up and perseverance. And of course, that's what PrepWell Academy's athlete plan helps students and families to figure out. All right, let's go to our last category, category 3, the recreational athlete. The recreational athlete never really got on the sports train to begin with, for any number of reasons. They may have tried sports and not been particularly skilled or interested, or maybe they didn't have the time or the money or the access or the role models. Maybe they stuck with recreational sports at the YMCA or summer camps or local leagues, but at a very basic level, a level that didn't require year-round commitments, expensive uniforms, travel, hotels. And many parents out there would agree that there are not many opportunities like this out there anymore. Most of the sports teams and leagues get very skilled and very fancy and very expensive very quickly. And there's a huge gap between the wannabe elite athletes and the recreational athletes. And the recreational athletes are being left behind. These athletes certainly don't have the potential to play sports in college, but they can certainly find a place on an intramural or a club team if they get the requisite skills, even if it's not one of their main activities. There are many students who fall into this category. They might be in the band or theater or music or entrepreneurship, or maybe they spend a lot of their free time working or looking after siblings or grandparents. Now that we've laid out these three categories of athletes, let's now consider the motivations that most students and families have for starting with sports to begin with. And as I go through each one of these, I want you to try to identify which of these reasons, or combination of reasons, is what led you to introduce your child to sports, as well as what may be motivating them or you to continue down this path, and at what intensity. Reason number one why people start sports: because everyone else is doing it. Namely, our kids' friends are doing it. This is a pretty simple reason. We start our kids in sports at a young age because we think it's the thing to do, or we did it when we were kids, or everyone else in the playgroup started doing it, so we started doing it. Reason number two: it's good exercise. We all know how much energy kids have and how much screen time they get every day. So it sounds like a great idea to get them outside and doing something physical with their bodies. Check. Reason number three: my child loves sports. They love it because they're good at it, or because they see it on TV or their phones, or they see their older siblings playing sports, and they come to love the act of playing sports. Fair enough. Great reason. Now we get into some dicier territory here. Reason number four on why students, children, begin sports: to pay for college. Sports will allow my child to go to college for free when they get a full ride athletic scholarship. If this is your motivation, you're assuming that your child has the potential to make it to the elite Division I athlete category. And despite how romantic this sounds, it can also be very misguided. And I've addressed how unlikely this scenario is many, many times, both in my blog and on previous podcast episodes. So I'm not going to belabor it here, but let me summarize it as follows. The odds that your child will, number one, be good enough to be a Division I athlete, number two, develop the body type that's often required to play their sport at the college level, no matter how good they are, and number three, that they play a sport that actually offers full ride athletic scholarships, which for boys is only basketball and football, and for girls is only basketball, volleyball, tennis, and gymnastics. These odds are very remote. Does it happen? Yes. Do we hear about it in the press and at the cocktail parties? Yes. Does it happen as much as we think? No. So to get your child involved in sports for this reason alone is a tough way to go. Reason number five: sports will help my child get into a college that they otherwise wouldn't get into without sports. Now, this is a fair position because it doesn't require your child to necessarily be an elite Division I athlete. They can be a very accomplished athlete, what I would characterize as a Division III athlete, and use those skills as a calling card to get into oftentimes some very highly selective colleges if they get recruited to play their sport. Now, as I mentioned, this is by no means an easy path or some kind of default position that just happens on its own if your child doesn't quite make it to Division I. It just doesn't magically happen. It still takes an awful lot of planning and outreach and luck and timing and research. But it's not a bad strategy. I've helped multiple students, dozens of students, put this strategy into place. But one last caveat here. The difference between a Division I athlete and a Division III athlete can be very, very slim. The competition these days at the Division III level is fierce. Just because your son or daughter plays a varsity sport in high school does not mean that they're automatically on track to play a Division III sport. It's extremely competitive. There are lots and lots of Division I level athletes who, for whatever reason, don't quite make it to Division I, who then play at the Division III level. So if your child is on that track, they should not think that this is an easy path either. And reason number six: to help my child prepare for military service academies and ROTC scholarships. This is a great strategy if your child wants to be competitive during the application process for a West Point or a Naval Academy or an Air Force Academy, or for an ROTC scholarship. An athletic background is a very valuable asset. It's almost a prerequisite. Those programs demand high competence in academics, athletics, and leadership. So keeping your child engaged in sports for as long as they show promise and aptitude is a very smart idea. And this actually relates back to paying for college as well. If your child's athletic career helps them to secure an ROTC scholarship, they could save hundreds of thousands of dollars on college because many ROTC scholarships pay full tuition for 4 years. And of course, if their athletic skill contributes to them getting an appointment to a service academy, like West Point, then college cost goes down to zero, because everybody at service academies is on 100% full scholarship. Having an athletic background is a must for students aspiring to one of these programs, and something that I go over time and time again in PrepWell Academy's military plan. And I'm sure there are plenty more motivations for starting sports and continuing with sports, but I think this covers a good number of them. Now, the question is, at what point should my child decide, with my guidance, of course, which category of athlete they will be, and to what end? In other words, at what point should you decide that your child is destined to be a Division I athlete, or a Division III athlete, or a recreational athlete? Now, before we dig into this, I want to quickly address a myth related to sports participation in college admissions that a lot of families get wrong, in my opinion. And that is the idea that college admissions officers routinely give some outsized amount of credit to students who play sports in high school, as if it's some kind of a mandatory prereq. I can't tell you how many parents I talk to who are horrified at the suggestion that their child drop a sport in 10th or 11th grade. It's as if their entire college application is hinging on their participation in a sport. I hear over and over again, but what will the admissions officer think if my son doesn't play soccer or volleyball? What if that's not on their application? Well, maybe they'll think that they just weren't too into sports. In fact, if they're not that into sports and they're playing JV soccer as a junior, they're spending an awful lot of time on a sport that might not get them much more credit than any other extracurricular activity. And what makes this even worse is when the time dedicated to this sport crowds out opportunities to participate in things that the child actually cares about or would excel in, or that would be aligned with their preferred major. This could be a big mistake. Yes, students who play sports, specifically varsity sports, they do get a lot of credit because admissions officers know how much time and commitment they take, but they don't get double or triple the credit. It's not a mandatory thing, especially if they're not standouts or captains or looking to be recruited. So the advice here is simply not to put too much weight on sports in high school. Just like we talked about volunteer work a few weeks ago. If sports are your thing, then go for it. But if you're doing it because of some long-held belief that it's a must-have for college applications, I might reconsider how much time and commitment you put to them. Okay, when should these decisions be made? Let's start with the Division I prospect. In my opinion, by the time your child is 11 or 12, you should have a pretty good idea if they have the talent, the body type, the interest, the work ethic, the attitude, the resources, the time necessary to get to the Division I level. There'll just be something very different about them. They will be better than good. They will be unusually good. They will have instincts and abilities that far outshine their peers. And importantly, their bodies should project in a way that's advantageous to their sport. And no, it's not always easy to pick out these athletes, and you won't always know whether you're making the right decision or not. but the earlier you can identify this, the better. Now, granted, some athletes will be late bloomers. Some will have outrageous work ethic that overcomes physical limitations, and some will develop off-the-chart skills, but these will typically be the exceptions, not the rule. How about Division III prospects? Once your child is in 9th grade and they're put up against tougher competition from a larger geography, you can tell pretty quickly how they're going to stack up. If they are still one of the top players on their team, maybe one of the top players in the league, maybe they play JV or varsity as a freshman, depending on the competitiveness of their high school, and they're still motivated, despite the growing number of distractions that happen when they're in high school, then there's a good chance that they have a future at a Division III school if they keep the pedal to the metal. I would say that this is the largest category of student athletes. If, in 9th grade, they start to fade and they're not overly competitive anymore in this new environment, then maybe they're not on the Division III track. The recreational athletes can be identified, I would say, by 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. If they're not on a fancy club travel team and playing year-round by then, their future in high school sports, I don't want to say it's over, but it's very questionable, depending on the competitiveness of your high school sports programs. Because these days, depending on the type of high school you go to, if you haven't been playing a sport year-round for a few years before getting to high school, it's likely that you're not going to be an impact player on a high school team, especially for some of the smaller teams like basketball, where there's 12 athletes on the roster. So in this case, maybe it's time to focus on other things that are more aligned with your goals and competencies. And as I was exploring these categories in my head, I realized that my 4 sons inhabit each of these 3 categories. My 2 older sons, who are identical twins, they're seniors right now, they're in the Division III category. And here's how I think they ended up there. When they were in 6th and 7th grade, they were pretty good athletes in their primary sport, which happened to be lacrosse. And they played on the fancy travel teams, and they played year-round, and they traveled the country. And for a few months, there was a window where I thought that they may have had some Division I potential in lacrosse. At the time, they were also playing basketball, where they were above average for their peer group, but not necessarily college-level material. But there came a time that I had to weigh in and help them make a call. This was right as they were entering high school. I didn't want to sit on the sidelines and just let this play out on its own or leave it completely up to them, because I had seen what had happened for years and years and years working with high school athletes in my job, because it was just too important, and they were investing too much time and effort not to have a plan. Did they want to commit 100% of their time to lacrosse in the hope that they would have what it takes to get to that Division I or Division III level? Or did they want to spread their attention to multiple sports and not worry so much about being a Division I athlete? And as we discussed their longer-term goals, it became apparent that they were interested in the military and in earning an ROTC scholarship to college. And with this as the goal, they shifted gears from 90% lacrosse and 10% basketball to 25% lacrosse, 25% swimming, 25% water polo, and 25% basketball. Their new ambitious goal was to become 4-sport varsity athletes, because that's what would carry the most weight in the ROTC application process. ROTC programs and service academies look for all-around athletes. So they sacrificed being excellent in one sport to be very good in 3 or 4 sports. This also took the pressure down quite a bit, and they ended up having a great high school athletic career, even without the Division I scholarship, because they met new friends, they learned different strategies, they played for different coaches, they didn't get injured because they had this multi-sport approach. And as it turned out, ironically, they both won ROTC scholarships to Yale, which pays for almost all of their schooling anyway. So there was actually a nice financial payoff in the end, even though they didn't get the traditional D1 athletic scholarship. Now, my third son is going in the opposite direction. He was also a multi-sport athlete growing up. He played lacrosse, basketball, and swimming. And by ninth grade, he, with a little discussion with me, decided to stop everything to pursue his new love, which was water polo. Although he started playing water polo very late in the big scheme of things, very late in the game, basically in the middle of 8th grade, he really loved the sport. He took to the sport. His body was perfect for the sport. He's now 6'6" and left-handed, and he wants to see if he'll be good enough to take it to the Division I water polo level. Now, the jury's out. He's still a work in progress, and we'll see if he can pull it off, as he's a sophomore right now. My fourth son has more of a recreational athlete attitude right now. He plays a few sports, but hasn't really locked into anything quite yet. Now, he's in 6th grade, and I will be keenly observing him over the next 12 to 18 months to see if I can help him make the decision about what he wants to do. Maybe he'll want to stay a recreational athlete. Maybe he'll take to swimming. Maybe he'll grow to 6'5" and 6'6" like his brothers. I just don't know yet. But I'm keeping my eye on him, and I will be ready to help guide him and make the tough decisions probably within the next 2 years. And this is the type of audit and reflection I suggest that you do with your child. Where are they now? What are their goals? And how can you help them achieve them? Hopefully, if you're a PrepWell Academy student, part of the way you're helping them achieve that is by having them listen to the videos that I give out every single week. That's going to help keep them on track and keep their attitude right. If you're not enrolled in PrepWell Academy yet, and this information is interesting, intriguing, and you think would be helpful and beneficial for your son or daughter, then sign them up, especially if they're a freshman and sophomore, because we don't allow juniors and seniors into PrepWell Academy because in our philosophy, that's too late. Well, friends, I know that was a lot to digest, and I hope this analysis has given you some food for thought. I hope it's prompted you to stop and think about how sports are affecting your child. If your child is in 9th or 10th grade, how should they approach sports over the next 2 to 3 years? If you have a youngster at home in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, what sports, if any, do you start them in or continue them in? Where do they fit on the spectrum? Are they right on track, or are they blindly moving ahead just because there's momentum behind them and you haven't really thought about it? I wish you good luck. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the continued support. If you know a parent with a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share the episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box with the tiny arrow that points up. That's the share button. Click on that button, text your friends the link to this episode, put a little note in there recommending that they give it a listen. And if, of course, you have questions, you have comments, an idea for an upcoming episode, if you want me to help you auditing your child's background to figure out which direction they should go, I do that all the time. Please reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram at PrepWell_Academy. Check out our blog, Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday, in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.